Okay, I've managed to clear all the clothes off my bed. We have a new microphone. The lighting's pretty good. So with that said, now seems as good time as any to pump out another video, so let's get into it. The Audio Technica MSR7Bs. These are a very good looking pair of headphones. I love the sort of blue trim that they have, along with a little silver around the outside, the nice subtle lettering there, and the subtle symbolism, the mix of the chrome features along with the black and the blue accents. Overall, I really like these. In fact, the looks are kind of the reason I ended up picking these up. I had no idea what these were at first. Later on, I ended up looking them up, and it turns out that these are a type of headphones that Audio Technica made so you could have some nice studio detail even when you're on the go. For most mixing purposes, most studios would use open back headphones because they typically sound more natural, and you don't have issues of things like reverberations within the ear cups that might be distorting the sound. So Audio Technica's goal here was to give you a nice, very detailed and accurate pair of headphones that are closed back so you can take them on the go, edit them in public or in a hotel room or anywhere where you might have a lot of noise. For the longest time, I did not know that. And at my job, these kept staring at me on the shelf. So in a sense, you could say that when it comes to these headphones, I'm married for looks. Now that can really backfire because with great beauty can sometimes come great pain. And these ones are probably the most painful headphones that I own. Now, when I say they're the most painful headphones that I own, I actually don't mean in terms of comfort, because as far as comfort goes, they're totally fine. I mean painful in terms of sound. And we are going to get to that. But for right now, let's actually start with comfort and build and all the other fun stuff. So in terms of comfort, these ones I would say are pretty middling. There's not anything that's particularly comfortable about them, but there's also nothing that's really particularly bad about them either. Unlike their cousin, the M50X, which these are not the stock pads, but just imagine the stock pads. I'll put a picture up here somewhere. So unlike their cousins, the M50X, the MSR7Bs have pads that are actually decently deep. They're decently deep, and while they are a lot more pliant and squishy than the other pads, they're not so squishy that they're going to completely compress like the stock M50X pads. So overall, I find the pads to be good and the cup depth to be enough that it's actually pretty comfortable. Well, comfortable. They're not uncomfortable is the point. Now, the headband is pretty standard fare for a pair of headphones. Pretty thin, not much padding there. Again, I wouldn't say that they're really uncomfortable. Basically, they're kind of middle of the road. As far as clamp force, they're also kind of middle of the road. I guess it's sort of more of a little more clampy than some people might like. At least the trick that I was told is that to figure out clamp force, you just pull on them, and however much they pull back, that is the clamp force. Also, when you pull them out, if they have this bend here, then they have more clamp force. Whereas if you can pull them out and they go flat, then they have a linear clamp force. Now, what that really means at the end of the day, I'm not totally sure, but we're rolling with it. Some other notable things about these headphones. They come with that's about like maybe a 4-foot cable, maybe a little bit longer. I think that's about 4 feet. Now, the problem with the length of this cable is it does not pass the lean back in my chair test. Basically, if I were to plug these in, I would need to whip out the extender. So that's unfortunate. Now, these ones do have a removable cable, but it is once again another proprietary connector. I own 3 different pairs of Audio Technica headphones, and they all have a different connector. Now, granted, the R50X and the M50X both use 2.5 millimeter connectors on the end, which is a little more common, but the actual locking mechanisms, as far as I know, are actually different. Are they different? Well, I guess there's one test I can do, which is try plugging it in here and seeing if it locks. Oh, all right, never mind. So this does lock, but still you can't really use this for the R70X because there's two connections. Regardless, Audio-Technica is no stranger to fully proprietary connectors, so that's always a pain. Now, one nice thing that Audio-Technica does do for you is they actually do just straight up give you a 4.4 millimeter balanced cable directly in the box, which is nice because if you had to buy this cable with its proprietary connector from a third-party vendor, it would probably cost you quite a bit, just like it did with my R70X and my HG600 cables. Those weren't cheap. I had to go to Amazon to get those to get the free shipping on them, and even then it wasn't cheap. For those of you who don't know, the benefit of this is that it's more power efficient, so you can use a weaker source and run more powerful headphones, but then also the fact that it reduces noise on the cable. By having balanced, you reduce any sort of static or what have you. Now, it is nice that they include this cable. Not that you're really gonna need the extra power on this thing, because I think these are only like something like 48 ohms, I wanna say. It's something low. So you're not really gonna need it. You can run this on like a phone or a MacBook or whatever. And that is the point, because they basically want you to be able to use these wherever. And that wouldn't really be very useful if you needed a balanced connector or these were just very high power. I mean, it's a good thing that they gave it to you, I guess, so you can get some really, like, you know, as the audiophiles would call it, black silences, and really not have very much like background sizzle or hiss or anything like that. But not really sure that you would need it for this pair of headphones. Now, as far as the build quality of these things go, they do actually seem pretty good overall. Like everything seems pretty sturdy and in place, and like, you know, stuff like the clicks, for instance, are very nice, with one exception in terms of build quality, and that is, so that's not ideal. I need a little more light in here. Ugh, don't love that. It's a little rainy out today, so the lighting is going to be a little bit shadowy, but we're working with it. Now, another issue I do have with these things is that, oh my God, I can't even get them to see. The left and right indicators on these things are so faint that you can hardly see them. I'm constantly needing to check myself to see if I have them on right. And eventually I just ended up resorting to which way the cups lean when you have the headband pointed up straight. But even on the, oh my God, I can't even get it to, come on, come on, come on, come on. And even on the cable connectors too, you can barely even see it. Even if you know where it is, even if you're looking right at it, it's so hard to see it. And considering that this is a pair of headphones that they want you to be able to take on the go, you might be plugging and unplugging the cable a bunch. So you are just basically gonna have to struggle every time that you need to plug in these cables and then figure out which ear to put them on. Oh my God. Oh. Jeez. Okay, now we are going to get to the crux of why I both love and hate these things, and they're sort of Achilles' heel. Now, in terms of sound overall, the way I would describe them is very clean, pretty balanced overall. Definitely a much leaner sound than I personally like, but for critical listening, that's really good. But the Achilles heel of them is they are so sharp. Like so sharp and so sibilant. These are the most sharp and the most sibilant headphones that I own. But before we really dig into that, I do want to talk about the things that I like about these, and at least in terms of sound quality goes. These have a very clean, tight, and well extended bass. Some bass is where you get that rumble. Mid bass is where a lot of the beats come in. That's what most people really notice. The thing that they are lacking a bit though is that upper bass, and that is intentional. In a previous video where we talked about the M50X, there they are, we talk about the sort of fire break that a lot of headphone manufacturers do to distinguish between the bass frequencies and the mid frequencies, so you get more clarity and more definition. These are essentially designed for that exact purpose. They put a pretty big fire break in there, where they took a much larger scoop out of the upper bass than when headphones like your M50X, and certainly compared to more balanced headphones like the R70X. And personally, for my taste, that does kind of go against what I personally like to listen to. I typically like that upper bass region, and when headphones have a lot of that, because in my mind, it makes the music feel a lot more filled in or meaty or having a lot of body. Without it, the sound can sometimes feel a bit thin or hollow. Now, the leanness of this sound is kind of the point, because as I mentioned, this is meant to be highly detailed studio sound, meant for critical listening. So like, let's say if you're editing a movie or a song or something, that you can really pick out and pinpoint all the differences. Now, it may be very lean just due to that upper bass region, but the bass itself otherwise does feel very complete and very detailed and very tactile, and also just well extended. So it does sound like there's a lot of bass there, but it might not feel like there's a lot of bass there because it doesn't have that upper bass region that really gives it that body. Now, in a previous video, I did sort of mention that with the Apple EarPods, where these don't have very much mid or sub bass, but they do have that upper bass, and the little ports on there do interact with the flat of your ear as well, which can give it more bass presence, even if they don't have that much actual bass sound or bass volume. So basically, it almost tricks your brain into thinking that there's more bass than there is. Now, these do the opposite. It almost makes me feel like there's less bass than there really is. Now, the bass is definitely there, and it definitely sounds very good, but it just doesn't have as much of that presence that I really like personally. Now, some people will love that. I have at least 2 coworkers who love listening to metal and EDM, who really like that sort of lean, light, and very clear sound to them. I mean, I suppose before we get into the elephant in the room that is the treble, we should talk about the mid-range. Mid-range. These ones do have a little more mid-range emphasis than most headphones. It's not like a lot more, but it is more, which I really like, because the mid-range is where the vocals are, and it's also where a lot of the instruments live. I mean, obviously, vocals and instruments cover the entire frequency, but the part of the vocals and instruments that you notice live right there in that mid-range. So personally, I like that because they're usually the star of the show. As far as the quality of the mid-range, overall, it is fairly linear, which is to say that it's fairly normal, and it does actually have more of that lower mid-range presence that I particularly like, which is to say that they're very vocal forward and that they have very clean and clear vocals. So overall, if you are focusing in on vocalists and your guitarists and other instruments, these are very good headphones for doing that. And now we get to the elephant in the room, which is the treble. So treble is, for those who don't know, where most of the detail lives in music. By detail, I think a good way of describing detail is to compare things to like a painting. So in a painting, or, you know, like kind of like that painting right there, So in a painting, I would say the base are the largest colors. They're like the base, well, base colors. They're what you paint the canvas that you're going to fill in smaller denominations of colors with later. Whether it's white, whether it's black, just big, broad strokes. It is the foundation that uplifts the rest of the painting. The mids, I would say, are all the colors that you're using to actually make the image of what you're doing. And this is typically where all the emotion and all the themes are. Now, the treble is what I would say is like when all the little fine details, like lining. It really gives it contrast and it really creates a clearer image. So when you apply that concept to these headphones, they really do have a lot of that sort of sharp lining to them. Now, it's done very well in the sense that they have really good instrument separation. Everything comes in very clear, and you can definitely pick out different elements of a mix really well. In fact, there is an album that I really like. It's called Sigma Moth by, I think they're now going to the name Asanity. I forget exactly which song it is, but obviously the album is moth themed. And in one of the songs, I didn't know this originally, but there you can hear moth wing beats, which I did not know about until I put these on my head. And they're very faint, but you're able to pick them out with stuff like this. So these are extremely detailed and clean. Now, these are by a pretty wide margin the most detailed headphones that I own. The problem with these ones is that they are extremely sharp. Now, for those of you who don't know, there's a concept in sound called sibilance. That is the S and the T sounds that you hear all the time when people talk. There's also different instruments that make that sibilant sound, such as like hi-hats, or when you drag your fingernail or pick across a guitar string, you might get a little bit of that sibilance. With these headphones, very frequently, you get a lot of that sibilance, whether you like it or not. Well, I don't actually know who would like sibilance. So it's sort of a double-edged sword that you have here, where you get a lot of detail and you get a lot of clarity and separation and distinction between all the instruments and elements in the mix, but it comes at a pretty hefty cost. On almost all female vocalists, you will hear a very sharp, and it's not even just on female vocalists, it happens on a lot of male vocalists too. Now, it is track dependent, but whereas a lot of headphones that have a little bit of a sibilant glare to them, it's like a few tracks that you might have sibilance and you can just kind of avoid those. With these ones, I would say it's almost the majority of tracks where you get that sibilance. These are not for the faint of heart. These are critical listening headphones at their finest. Now, for people's ears, the frequency that sibilance shows up in depends on your ear shape and as well as, I suppose, psychoacoustics, so, you know, how your brain interprets sounds. So it's different for every person. However, for me, wherever the sibilance is on these, it is pretty much perfectly pinpointed to make my ears hurt. So that's kind of a negative. Well, it's more than kind of a negative. For me, it makes these essentially, I don't want to say unusable, but I don't listen to these very often. I do enjoy what they do when it comes to that clarity and that separation and that soundstage, but I just cannot deal with the sharpness of them, the stabbiness of them. Now, look, I know you can EQ the headphones, which is short for equalizer for those who don't know. Basically, you can edit the sound and try to reduce the volume of certain frequencies, but I don't really feel like doing that. I'd rather just listen to a pair of headphones that I would like more than go through all the trouble of EQing something. And look, I know there's purists out there who are like, no, just EQ them. You're just being lazy. Yes, I'm being lazy. I don't want to have to do more work. I spent like $250 on these things. I want them to just be what I want. And you know what? Maybe I should have returned them. Now, another really nice and very impressive thing about these is the soundstage. Now, soundstage I don't really like that term because it sort of gives you the idea of directional sound, whereas directional sound is actually imaging. Soundstage, I would describe it more as sound depth of field. So how close or far objects in a mix sound. And that can contribute to things like separation, but they're not strictly linked. You can have good separation without necessarily having a really deep sound. Now, these are not going to blow other headphones out of the water, especially not a pair of open back headphones with good soundstage like these ones. But for a pair of closed back headphones, these do an insanely good job of still retaining good soundstage. For those who don't know, soundstage and a lot of certain details are really difficult to get right with a pair of closed back headphones because they have those reflections off of the ear cup. And that can make things sound very unnatural, and also just the fact that they're physically closed in makes them feel and sound less open than a pair of headphones where the back is literally open and sound can pass in and out. These ones, it's like a closer experience to having speakers near your ear rather than having a cup go all the way around your ear. Now, another thing that I do want to mention is the fact that they have such a good soundstage, they have such a good imaging, and they have such good detail and separation makes these really good for gaming. Now, honestly, these are especially notable as a good pair of gaming headphones that are closed back. So if it's a really noisy environment that you play games in, these ones would definitely give you better isolation than something like these R70X would. So if you are familiar with the headphone world at all, this description that I'm painting for you folks might sound very similar to another brand of headphones and their house sound. And that other brand is Beyerdynamic, or I guess it's Beyerdynamic, or at least that's what the rep said. I mean, look, it's a German word, so I don't know. But their house sound definitely tracks with the tuning of this one, where you have a very detailed and sibilant treble. You have a strong bass performance on their closed-back headphones with that large fire break in the middle to give that separation between the bass and the mids. And you have a fairly emphasized mid-range. Now, much in the same way that the R70X feels like Audio-Technica's answer to the HD600 and 6XX from Sennheiser, it also feels like the MSR7b is meant to be Audio-Technica's answer to Beyerdynamic's headphones. Now, these ones do have some advantages over them. They are smaller in terms of footprint as well as in weight compared to Beyerdynamic, so that would make them better for travel and transportation. Now, one thing I did notice that's kind of a point against them being a travel pair of headphones. Oh my god. What? Now, one point against these being a travel pair of headphones, these ones do not fold up in any way. They can only, oh my god, they can only lay flat, unlike the M50X that have 180-degree swivel and they fold up. But overall, these are definitely lighter and smaller than Beyerdynamics. Now, Beyerdynamics, they have some pretty big cups. They have big cups that are fairly deep and with pretty thick pads on them. And they have metal hinges. So overall, I would not say the Beyerdynamics are really all that portable. However, they did recently release a more portable version of their headphones. I believe it's the DT270. Now, I didn't really get to listen to the Beyerdynamics for that long. Each unit, I really only got to spend like maybe 10 to 30 seconds with each. But at least the perception was very similar to these MSR7Bs. These ones, though, I do think overall they sound more natural, whereas those ones seem more like detail fiends. Well, I suppose the 700 sound pretty natural, but at least in terms of how I perceive them, these ones do seem to have more soundstage. Now, granted, I did not really get to spend that much time with the Beyerdynamics, but at least that's my perception, having spent a lot of time with these and a little bit of time with those. So overall, I do feel very conflicted with the MSR7Bs. I do really like the looks of them. Honestly, I'm almost tempted to keep them just for the looks because they look really nice on my wall. And I am kind of petty when it comes to stuff like aesthetics. And they are really detailed, and I do really enjoy what they do well. And I do have other headphones if I want just a more balanced and complete experience. But it really is that treble that is just the final nail in the coffin for these ones. I mean, it really is their Achilles heel because I just cannot justify listening to them most of the time because that treble is so uncomfortable. Now, look, I could do like a sine sweep and try to find the exact area where they start to give me trouble in terms of that sibilance and that sharpness and try to EQ it down. But I don't know, man. I just don't really feel like doing that. Maybe I will. Maybe there'll be another video. Now, a good comparison I can make in terms of how these sound, and this just kind of came to me the other day, is a dry but strong glass of wine. Now, that's kind of a weird comparison to make, and I know most of you probably aren't really wine drinkers. I mean, I'm not really either, but it just sort of came to me in the sense that there are definitely some things that are really nice about these, just like how in a dry wine you can get that sort of like fruity taste to it. But overall, these do sound a bit dry and boring at times, and they also are quite sharp. So the sharpness is almost like the alcohol-y taste that you would get from a glass of wine that maybe makes you not really want to drink wine. Maybe you decide that you're not really much of a wine guy at all after that sort of strong taste to them. And for some people, that's kind of disqualifying. In this case, it is disqualifying for me. Well, I feel like I'm being pulled in two different directions with these headphones. I like them for the detail that they have and the separation and really the clarity, because most of the headphones that I listen to are definitely very vibey with a thick sort of mesh together sound. These ones are definitely very separated, and I do appreciate them for that. However, the leanness of them does take me out of the experience, and that sibilance is just the nail in the coffin that is a step too far for me. That is the straw that broke the camel's back with these headphones, and is the reason why most of the time I can't really listen to them. And it's funny because that is the reaction that I had when I first put them on. I was like, why the hell did I spend more money on these ones than on the M50X? I end up liking the M50X more. And at least that was my initial reaction. But I did keep them for a while and listen to them a little while longer. And I started to really appreciate the positives of them, which is that detail. And so then I started to actually kind of like them. In fact, I do like them in some ways. But overall, I kind of swung back the other direction, back to where I originally was, which is that I don't really like the sharpness of them, and I don't really like the leanness of them. Which is why I say that if you don't vibe with it initially, you probably won't vibe with it in the end. And I probably should have returned these, but once again, just the look of them is so nice. And it is nice having a detailed pair of headphones, but am I really going to mix on these? And I don't know, it just doesn't seem like the right fit. I might sell these eventually, but I'm not really sure. This is definitely going in the maybe category. For those who don't know, part of the reason why I made this channel was so I can review my entire collection and sell off probably half of it. So yeah, once again, I guess this is another video to drive home the point that if you try something and it really doesn't vibe with you, there is no shame in just returning it. You don't have to keep something just because it is technically a better headphones. Just listen to what vibes with you. All right, so I'm gonna get out of here before the sunlight starts to abandon me even more. I probably should have recorded this earlier, but I had a lot of things to do, such as procrastinating in my bed, scrolling on my phone. But hey, at least we got the recording done. Hopefully it's not too bad and that you actually liked it. And speaking of which, if you liked the video, definitely hit the like button down below. And if you want to see more, definitely subscribe. And I will see you on the next one. Thanks.